Richard Leblanc is a veteran corporate governance expert. He joins us now with his perspective. Richard, good morning to you.
Hi, John. Nice to be with you again.
What went through your mind when you heard about the arrest last night? Let's start there.
Well, a couple of things. He's offshore, and he may be a flight risk. So I think the Department of Justice, Southern District of New York, which is very aggressive, I think they want to get him extradited as soon as possible. And the second thing is the issue is whether he had knowledge of customer funds and investor funds going from FTX to Alameda. And he's been asked that a number of times by BBC and ABC, and he hedged on that. If he had knowledge, he's likely going to go to jail. So the Southern District likely has books and records now that he, in fact, did have knowledge. Not only did he have knowledge, they will probably allege that he directed that those funds be transferred.
What did you make of the fact that he's been doing all these media interviews throughout this up until the point of his arrest?
Well, I mean, most counsels will advise not to do this because the interviews are evidence of culpability when it comes to trial. So he's a young man. He's 30 years old. He's eccentric, eclectic. He did not have a governance structure, and there are companies, including pension funds in Canada. Ontario Teachers invested a whopping $130 million in this individual's company, FTX.
And we mentioned this morning the SEC with its fraud charges, talking about this elaborate scheme over multiple years in the process of raising more than $1.8 billion from those, in many cases, highly professional investors. And Richard, what is the conversation that is taking place? Because this company was also seen as one of those bridges from the traditional worlds of investing, traditional banking worlds, into this new area of crypto. Is it that people just were looking at that and maybe less at the specifics of FTX?
I think that's exactly right, John. They were enamored, it appears, and they appear not to have done their due diligence, including sophisticated investors like Ontario Teachers and others. I mean, the first question you ask is, how is our beneficiary, how are our teachers' money going to be protected? What governance and controls are there in place? And the new CEO said, and he did the Enron workout, he has never seen the lack of internal controls. I mean, John, it's shocking. I mean, they had texts that would disappear. They didn't have books and records. They had minimal, if any, internal controls. They had related party transactions, conflicts of interest, use of FTX assets for personal purposes. And these are sophisticated investors. And the FTX board was really Bankman-Fried, another employee, and a lawyer. I'm really surprised that these sophisticated investors didn't insist on due diligence, if not a seat on the board. This is real money. This is $130 of Ontario Teachers' retirement money. And the same thing happened with the Quebec pension fund of crypto of $150 million. So I think the lesson here is, we need regulators in Ontario and Canada to catch up and be able to protect investors and be able to look at the investments of pension funds inside these enamored, misunderstood, and quite frankly, very dangerous companies.
And, you mentioned Enron. I'll also mention Bernie Madoff, only because it was remarkable that within one day, but 14 years later, you had Bernie Madoff arrested, and then you have Sam Bankman-Fried arrested. We're waiting for more details specifically on what's behind the arrest. The New York Times has done some reporting on that and has reported that the criminal charges against him include wire fraud conspiracy, securities fraud conspiracy, and money laundering. That's according to the New York Times. But again, similar themes to what we heard with Bernie Madoff. And then, of course, in figuring out the road ahead after Madoff, it was a long and winding one. Does a similar situation unfold here in terms of trying to get to the finish line?
Yeah, it is not as easy as Theranos. And by the way, she committed fraud and was sentenced to prison as well. This is very complex. They had dozens and dozens of entities that the new management team is going through. So this will take some months to sort out. But the good news is that they have a seasoned group of of workout managers overseeing FTX now. They're implementing internal controls. They're testifying in Washington today and tomorrow. So I think it may go quicker than we think, but I think the Justice Department really wants to get their hands on this youngster and bring him in to custody. The bigger lesson here, John, is this cryptocurrency regime, and regulators really need to catch up with understanding this new type of currency, including Bitcoin, and imposing governance regulations so this type of thing doesn't happen again. I mean, this happened simply because it could. So I think it's a learning opportunity for pension funds, for regulators of pension funds, and for the Canadian and Ontario government to catch up with cryptocurrency regulation and protect investors.